Just to go into what we're going to talk about, helplessness, just to set it up for a second. I want everyone to think about the community as a whole. And when we think about the community as a whole, we have many people who are functioning properly in the community. We have many people who are concerned citizens. Maybe they don't know how much power they have in their voice. Jeff, could you help me out with that?
Well, good evening, first of all. I'm very interested to hear what Ms. Rhodes has to say. Is Learned Helplessness, is this a book, or is this just an opinion?
No, it's actually a psychological study that is covered learned helplessness.
So it's a disorder?
It is.
I would love to delve into this and hear exactly what she has to say. I do have some opinions on it, but I would love for her to start off and introduce herself as we were talking in the last segment.
Okay. Ms. Rhodes, are you on the line with us, please?
Yes, I am.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay.
Much better.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for standing by and sticking with us. Again, if you could maybe for the audience, the listening audience, introduce yourself and just explain, your background, and we'll go directly into learned helplessness. I don't want to, belabor the point too much longer. Please.
Okay. Basically, I work in the area of medical research as a medical research consultant and development of new drugs and devices and biologicals. But my educational background is in psychology, and I had talked to Ken about the concept of learned helplessness, and frankly, he's the first person that understood what I was talking about. Because people just don't seem to really, quite grasp the picture that I've tried to give them, and I was beginning to think it was just me until I explained it the same way to you, Ken, and you got the point right away.
Sure. Now, if we could, learned helplessness is actually a study that you learned when you were in college taking psych courses. You learned what learned helplessness was, and then you started seeing, after you learned what learned helplessness was, you started seeing these things play out in your, first, as you left college and you branched out into a career, you started seeing learned helplessness that you had learned in college. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. My ex-husband is Puerto Rican, and he grew up in an inner city environment, and because of that, a lot of his family and friends were still located in those areas. So over a period of about 20 years, I spent significant amounts of time in that environment. Actually, even living in it for periods of time.
All right.
With family members. And I never thought I would ever apply the concept of learned helplessness when I learned about it in college. In fact, I thought it was kind of useless taking the class, and then I met all these new people, and then I realized I was watching it play out in real life. Really did happen.
Can you describe what it is that was playing out that you experienced? And maybe first, let's define what learned helplessness is, the technical term of learned helplessness, if you would.
Well, basically, it's helplessness that gets born in the face of an inescapable prejudice that matches helplessness that you can't do anything about. The experiment they do is with the dogs, and they have a slightly electrified floor, and they have three different groups. One dog can control the shocks, one can't, and then one can, and the other one can't, even though the other can. So they're in a pair. And what ends up happening is the dog who cannot control being shocked, no matter what he does, no matter where he is in that cage, he still gets shocked. He finally gives up, and he learns to be helpless because no matter what he does, nothing is going to change.
So let me just paint this again. We have an electrified floor, and the experiment is an animal that is caged, and the animal has a barrier that it can go through between areas of the floor. But in the experiment, because the floor is electrified, in one experiment, the dog is bouncing back and forth in the kennel, in the cage, and the floor is electrified. It has no place for relief. And another dog that may be part of the experiment has one half of the floor that is electrified, the other half is not. And
eventually, one is hopping back and forth, and at first nothing happens, but then eventually they turn one side off, and depending on which group they're in determines how they respond, whether they learn to be helpless, or in the case of the dogs that have some control over what happens, the ones who learn that they can stop it.
So now let me just put this in real life context. Let's say, for instance, inner city, depressed environment, crime. Maybe there's issues with education. We have police brutality. We have, let's say, for instance, New York City, 4 million people who are Hispanic and African American stopped. Some children, some adults stopped 3, 4 times. 1 out of every 10 stopped were found to have something that would be considered technically a violation. All right? But in this particular census tract, no matter where people went, they were being stopped by law enforcement, safety officials. Is this like learned helplessness?
Yes, it is. It is for the people being stopped.
Could you explain, please?
Well, prejudice figures a lot into learned helplessness. So when you're being stereotyped is what is happening here when you're profiling, it doesn't matter whether you're a bad person or a good person. You're automatically considered to be something negative, and so they're going to stop you and search you just because they have this concept in their mind that if you're black or Puerto Rican or whatever, that you're probably going to be more likely to have drugs on you or be involved in some kind of illegal activity, so they feel like they're justified in stopping and searching you. But as you pointed out, most of these people are totally innocent bystanders.
Correct.
Now, when you keep doing that to people who are innocent bystanders, that's where the learned helplessness will start to come in, because it doesn't matter whether they're good or bad; they're going to get stopped anyway.
And let me just interject there. 4 million people stopped in New York City, and we only had a minute number of people that actually filed complaints out of the 4 million people that were harassed. Is that learned helplessness?
Yes. Because what would be the point if nothing is going to change? When people have gotten to the point in time where it doesn't matter what they do, it doesn't change anything, and the consequences are negative every time, then why keep trying?
Jeff?
Miss Rhodes, and welcome to the show. This is Jeff, Ken's co-host. I would like to ask you, you did mention your ex-husband, Puerto Rican, Ken and myself, African Americans, and we focus on a lot of black issues on this show. So I'm wondering, do you find this disorder to be, the learned helplessness to be more prevalent amongst blacks and Hispanics?
I would say, it can happen to anybody. Even what you see in spousal abuse, for example, where the woman won't leave, that's another example of learned helplessness. I would say it probably is more common because of the fact that there are so many more negative stereotypes out there, and then it's the negative stereotypes of any kind that really feed into the whole paradigm.
Okay. When Ken told me we were having you on, and I was looking at the subject of learned helplessness, it made me immediately think of the post-traumatic slavery disorder. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that book or its authors. Have you? Because it's quite similar as to what you're talking, except for they put it specifically on the descendants of African slaves.
Well, you would have a generational situation there too, because you also pick up what you see your parents doing.
Learned behavior is what you're saying.
Right, because if you see, like you have, say all the precautions and things that young black men have been traditionally told about to take, when they go out in society, or when they deal with the police, or with white people, or whatever, those are examples of that type of behavior that they're learning from their parents.
Okay.
One thing I want people to consider is this. Officers come from a community, and minority officers, white officers, they are hired from a community. Now, there are some people that are hired and put in positions of authority, trust, are given a badge, a gun, trained, and yet and still when they come across officers that are abusing citizens' trust, that are not being held accountable, these officers lay down in the corner and do nothing. Is that learned helplessness?
I would definitely call it that too, because you got to look at the consequences to the actions and what's going to come out of it. So they do tell. So they do report it. What happens?
Yeah, there can be retaliation, retribution. They get harassed, and then they like me get fired. Except, of course, I'm fighting back. I'm not helpless.